The fork hit the glass once, sharp, deliberate. The sound cut clean through the carols still playing in the living room. Conversation stalled mid-sentence. I watched the tiny ripple in my wine settle my fingers still around the stem knuckles pale where I hadn't realized I was gripping too hard. He didn't look at me yet. He smiled at the room, then nodded toward the door. Everyone come outside for a second. Coats rustled, chairs scraped. Cold air rushed in as the door opened, carrying the smell of snow and pine. The driveway lights snapped on. Snow fell slow and steady, the kind that makes everything look forgiving. He stopped us beside the SUV, paint gleaming under the bulb's chrome too bright for the hour. He placed the keys in her palm and held them there a beat longer than necessary, like a photograph being staged. This, he said, tapping the hood with his knuckle, is what real success looks like. Someone laughed. A neighbor across the street paused mid-shovel. He added softer but somehow louder, "Not renting your whole life." The keys chimed as she lifted them. The sound stayed with me. Then he turned. Not fully, just enough. His eyes found me without effort. "Some people," he said, and glanced back at the car, "are just meant to watch." The cold pressed through my coat. I exhaled slowly so my breath wouldn't fog too much. I nodded once because that's what I've always done when the moment is being decided without me. My hand found the pocket of my coat and stayed there, thumb tracing the seam. Inside, the music kept playing. Outside, nobody spoke. Snow settled on the windshield in quiet layers, erasing fingerprints, erasing footprints. I watched the reflection of the lights ripple across the hood and thought about how surfaces lie best when they're polished. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I catalogued. The way his voice lifted on success. The way her smile held just long enough to be believed. The way the keys sounded when they moved from one hand to another. If you've ever been made small on a night meant for grace, stay with me. Some truths don't announce themselves. They wait. I stood there, counting breaths, feeling the weight of a detail no one else could see. The car idled once, then went still. And as the snow kept falling, one small fact settled into place, clean, precise, undeniable. They had no idea who paid for the life they were applauding. We went back inside without ceremony. The door closed, muting the cold, and the house resumed its rhythms as if nothing had been said. The tree lights blinked in their patient pattern. A record crackled at low volume, the needle settling into a familiar groove. Coats were hung, plates were lifted. Someone asked who wanted more gravy. I took my seat where I always did, at the corner of the table near the window, and turned my napkin once, then again, until the crease lined up with the wood grain. My father had a way of introducing people that sounded like inventory. When it was her turn, his voice gained a shine. "This is Brenda," he would say, palm open, as if presenting a prize. He listed accomplishments the way some men list mileage. There was a rhythm to it, practiced and confident, and he enjoyed the attention it gathered. When it came to me, he didn't stumble. He simply shortened the sentence. "And this is Eleanor." No adjectives. No footnote. The silence that followed was comfortable, well-worn, like a chair everyone knew not to move. At dinner, Brenda spoke and the room leaned in. Forks paused. Glasses hovered. She laughed and the sound traveled. I listened to the small things instead, the clink of ice against crystal, the scrape of a chair leg corrected with a shoe, the hum of the refrigerator cycling on. My hand tightened around the stem of my glass and relaxed again. I swallowed once slowly to keep the air moving. Being easy had taught me that much. It started early, this sorting, not with cruelty exactly, but with preference. She needed things. I was fine without. She was encouraged to try. I was praised for not needing to. "You're so low maintenance," my father used to say, the way a man compliments a reliable appliance. The word stuck. I learned to keep my wants folded small, to stack them neatly and slide them out of sight. Aunt Marjorie noticed. She always did. She sat across from me now, hands folded, her ring catching the light as she turned it once around her finger. When Brenda spoke, Marjorie nodded. When I did, she met my eyes for a beat longer than necessary, then looked back to her plate. After dinner, she pressed a cookie into my palm and said softly, "You're doing just fine." The sentence landed and passed through me without settling. Being seen without being defended leaves a different mark. I excused myself to refill water and stood at the sink listening to the house breathe. The faucet ran. Steam fogged the window, erasing the driveway, the car, the scene we'd all agreed not to revisit. I dried my hands carefully, one finger at a time. From the dining room, I heard my father's voice rise again, warm and certain, recounting a story that ended with laughter. My name did not appear in it. Back at the table, I watched the hierarchy hold. Nothing dramatic, nothing new, just the familiar alignment of attention, the way gravity favors mass. I made a note of it the same way I always had, quietly, accurately, without commentary. It was easier to let them believe I was untouched. It kept the peace. It kept the record clean. By the time dessert arrived, I understood something I hadn't put words to before. Being the easy daughter didn't mean I was loved less. It meant my absence would be noticed last and explained away fastest. By the time dessert plates were cleared that Christmas, the pattern had already settled back into place. It always did. The table looked the same, crumbs brushed into neat piles, forks aligned, candles burned down to soft stubs, but the air had shifted in a way only I seemed to track. I watched my father cut the pie with a steady hand, each slice measured generous where he intended it to be. When he passed the first plate across, it went to Brenda without comment. I received mine last, the crust broken, a corner missing. No one noticed. I folded my napkin and rested it on my knee, smoothing the fabric until the crease disappeared. It had been like that since birthdays still came with candles. Hers were events. Streamers taped, straight invitations mailed early, the good camera brought out of the hall closet. My name appeared on cards written by other people's parents. My handwriting practiced and small. My birthdays arrived quieter, a cake from the grocery store, a gift bag that made the same paper sound every year. You don't need much, my father would say, and it sounded like praise. I learned to blow out candles quickly to keep the smoke from lingering. Gifts told the same story. She unwrapped anticipation. I unwrapped utility. Sweaters in neutral colors. Books chosen for improvement, not pleasure. I learned the weight of a box before opening it, the way tape sounded when it was pulled back with care. I learned to smile early before disappointment had time to show itself. It wasn't that anyone was unkind. It was that kindness was rationed, and I understood where I stood in line. There was one afternoon, just one, when I asked why. We were all at the table, sunlight cutting through the blinds, dust floating in the beam like something alive. Brenda had brought home average grades and received applause. I had placed my paper down carefully, straight A's lined and blue ink corners squared. I waited. When nothing came, I asked softly, "Why does hers get celebrated?" The room paused, then broke open. Laughter first, a cousin's snort. My father ruffled my hair hard enough to sting and said, "Because she's the future." Someone repeated it like a joke. The word stuck to me. I nodded because that was the quickest way out. After that, I stopped presenting evidence. I slid papers into folders and closed them. I learned to sit with my hands folded so they wouldn't fidget. When praise came my way, rare brief, I accepted it like a receipt, folded once, tucked away. Wanting became a liability. Asking became a risk. Speaking became something I measured carefully, like stepping onto ice. Silence offered better footing. The house trained me in small ways. The sound of a chair scraping meant attention had shifted. The pause before my father spoke meant a decision had been made. I learned to breathe shallow when eyes turned my way, to widen my smile when the room needed it, to disappear without leaving. At night, I lined my shoes under the bed and set my alarm low. I moved through mornings like a guest who planned to leave no trace. Years later, I can still hear that laughter when I close my eyes, not loud, not cruel, just dismissive enough to do its work. It taught me efficiency. If you don't ask, you can't be denied. If you don't want, you can't be disappointed. If you don't speak, you can't be contradicted. Silence didn't make me invisible. It made me durable. By the time I left that table for the last time as a child, I carried the lesson intact. Not everyone is meant to be heard. Some of us are meant to remember. I carried that lesson with me into the years when choices begin to harden. Senior year arrived quietly, like a fog that doesn't announce itself until the edges blur. Acceptance letters came in waves. Brenda's were thick envelopes heavy with color and promised the kind you hold up to the light before opening. Mine were thinner, practical, folded to fit a smaller future. At the kitchen counter, my father slit envelopes with a letter opener he kept sharp. He read hers aloud. He skimmed mine. The sound of paper tearing marked the difference. Brenda's decision was treated like a victory lap. The expensive university brochure stayed open on the table for weeks, glossy pages curling at the corners. There were campus visits, hotel breakfasts, photos taken beneath stone arches. My parents spoke in numbers without flinching tuition, housing fees, as if reciting a weather report. When I said I'd enroll at the community college 20 minutes away, the room relaxed. My father nodded once. Sensible, he said, and meant it. I signed my forms at the same counter pen, scratching softly, careful not to smudge. Money moved through those months with different rules. Checks were written for her without discussion. For me, there were forms, aid applications, work-study schedules, a yellow legal pad where I listed hours and costs. I worked evenings and weekends, the register beeping its small acknowledgments, the smell of cleaner lingering on my hands. I paid my first tuition bill online at a library computer, the cursor blinking as if waiting for second thoughts. When the receipt printed, I folded it twice and put it in my bag. Classes began. Brenda sent photos, brick paths, coffee cups, group shots that grew larger with each post. I took notes in spiral notebooks that smelled faintly of paper and ink, the desks scarred with old initials. I learned to sit near the aisle, to leave early for shifts to read between tasks. My textbooks were used margins already lived in. I didn't mind. I read the footnotes first. They told the truth faster. I chose my courses carefully. Accounting because numbers don't perform. Asset management because patterns repeat if you watch long enough. Trust law because it rewards precision and punishes assumption. No one asked why. No one asked anything at all. At family dinners, my father spoke about Brenda's campus life with pride that filled the room. When he turned to me, he asked if I was keeping busy. I said yes. It was accurate enough. I studied at night under a desk lamp that hummed softly, the bulb warming the air above my hands. I learned the language of balance sheets, the calm logic of fiduciary duty. I memorized terms that sound gentle and are not irrevocable successor authority. I highlighted clauses and wrote questions in the margins, questions no one else had asked me to answer. Each exam came back with clean lines and small check marks. I stacked them in order newest on top. There is a particular quiet that comes from being overlooked. It's not emptiness. It's space. I moved through it without resistance, collecting skills the way other people collect souvenirs. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't explain my choices. I kept my receipts. I kept my syllabi. I kept copies. By the time degrees were framed hers, with ceremony mine, with staples, I understood the advantage I'd been given by accident. No one was watching. By the time my degree was folded into a file drawer and my last receipt scanned and labeled, the work arrived the way it usually does, quietly, without witnesses. I took a position with a retirement fund management firm housed in a low-glass building off a frontage road. The lobby smelled faintly of coffee and carpet cleaner. Phones rang with restraint. People spoke in full sentences. On my first day, I was handed a badge, a policy manual, and a stack of forms that required initials in blue ink. I signed where indicated slow and legible, and noted the dates. The work suited me. Numbers held still when asked, accounts reconciled, contributions posted on schedule. I learned the cadence of quarterly reports and the gravity of fiduciary duty. There is a particular sound a printer makes when it's producing something final, thick paper, deliberate pace. I liked that sound. It meant someone would rely on what came next. My income stabilized. I set rules for myself the way some people set alarms. Automatic transfers, capped spending receipts, scanned the same day they were created. Order made room. At night, my apartment stayed dim. A single lamp near the couch the glow contained. I reviewed statements with a pen that didn't smear and a ruler to keep lines straight. I rolled coins before depositing them, not because I needed to, but because it kept my hands honest. When raises came, they arrived as emails with attached PDFs. I printed them, initialed the margins, and filed them by year. I did not announce them. I did not celebrate. I updated the spreadsheet and closed the laptop. When I went home, I kept my uniform simple. neutral colors, shoes that could be wiped clean. I drove the same car I'd had for years, its paint dulled by winters, its engine reliable if given time to warm. In the driveway, it blended into the background the way I always had. Inside conversations unfolded along familiar lines. Brenda's plans, Brenda's prospects. Someone would ask what I was doing now. I said I was keeping steady. It was true in the way truths are when they're framed to fit. Money changes rooms when it's named. I had watched it happen too many times. The air tightens, chairs shift, requests dress themselves as jokes. I didn't want any of that touching what I was building. So I kept the numbers to myself. I paid cash when it mattered. I kept statements mailed to a P.O. box. I let assumptions do the work of concealment. Silence again was efficient. There were moments when the choice pressed against me. A holiday when envelopes changed hands. A comment about rent. An offer of help slid across the table like a favor I hadn't asked for. I accepted nothing. I stirred my drink until the ice rotated once and stopped. I nodded. I listened. I memorized phrasing. The restraint cost something, but it cost less than exposure would have. I didn't hide my success out of shame. I hid it because I'd seen what money reveals about people. The way eyes measure, the way voices recalibrate, the way boundaries soften. I preferred my boundaries intact. I preferred my work untouched by expectation. On paper, the years looked unremarkable: steady income, conservative growth, clean audits. In practice, they were careful, intentional. I kept my files current and my signatures consistent. When I left the office each evening, I locked my drawer and checked it once more. Outside, the light changed. Inside me, something held. The shadow had become a place I chose. The shadow had taught me patience, and patience taught me timing. When the lakeside market began to falter, it did so without drama. Listings lingered. Price cuts appeared in small increments, then larger ones. Signs stayed up through weather that should have sold them. I noticed because noticing had become habit. On my commute, I took a longer route once a week and watched the water change color with the season, the docks empty, the windows dark. Opportunity doesn't announce itself. It waits for someone who can read quiet. I didn't rush. I read disclosures the way other people read headlines. I tracked reductions with dates and notes in the margins. A lakefront house surfaced in my alerts and refused to leave solid bones. Western exposure, a dock that needed work but not apology. The photos were honest. Too honest for a hot market. I drove out on a gray afternoon and parked down the road, walking the rest of the way so the sound of gravel wouldn't announce me. Wind moved across the water. The place held still. I didn't put my name on anything. That decision had been made years earlier, the first time I learned what names invite. Instead, I called an estate attorney whose office smelled of paper and lemon polish. We spoke in measured sentences. He asked questions that mattered. I answered them with documents, not stories. A trust already existed, created by a relative who had died quietly without heirs pressing in. The language was clear. Authority was transferable. We amended where the law allowed and left the rest intact. I initialed each page where the tabs protruded, my pen pressing just enough to leave a clean line. The purchase moved the way serious things do. Wire transfers, confirmations, a title search that came back clean. The deed recorded to the trust. My signature appeared only where it belonged, witnessed and dated. No public record carried my name. The house passed from seller to entity without ceremony. On closing day, I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of water and listened to the email chime. When it arrived, I read it twice, then saved it to the correct folder. Outside, rain started and stopped without asking permission. Renovations followed, paid from the trust account. Contracts executed with precise scopes. Checks cut on time. I visited the site once wearing a cap pulled low, hands in my pockets. The contractor walked me through with the care reserved for someone who pays promptly. I nodded, asked for itemized invoices, and left before the sun dropped. The dock was reinforced, the windows replaced, the locks changed. Each receipt was scanned, labeled, and filed. Each improvement reduced noise. I told no one. Not because it was secret, but because it wasn't theirs. At family dinners, the lake came up the way it always does, someone's friend, someone's dream. I listened and passed the bread. My phone stayed dark. The house did what houses do when they're held correctly. It appreciated quietly added weight without flash. Renters would come later. For now, it rested. There is a particular calm that comes from alignment. The documents matched the intention. The signatures matched the dates. The account balances reconciled. I slept better. When I drove by the lake again, the water was brighter, the docks busy. I kept moving. The law doesn't boast. It doesn't smile for photographs. But it remembers what it's told. And that house without my name remembered me perfectly. The house didn't announce itself when it re-entered my life. It arrived the way paperwork often does, through an email, forwarded once then again until it landed where it belonged. A property management firm I'd vetted months earlier sent a screened application packet from a prospective tenant credit summary, income verification references attached. I read it at my kitchen table, morning light slanting across the page, coffee cooling within reach. The name took a moment to register. Then it settled. Brenda Whitman. I exhaled through my nose and kept reading. She never knew it was mine. The trust's name sat at the top of every document, neutral and unremarkable. The manager's notes were brief, professional. Strong income, clean history, eager timeline. I signed the approval digitally, the cursor blinking once before accepting my initials. The confirmation chimed. Outside, a delivery truck idled and moved on. I closed the laptop and washed my mug, watching steam lift and disappear. Some things are easier when they're procedural. The illusion assembled quickly. Brenda moved in and photographed the place the way people do when they want proof to travel faster than truth. Wide shots of water at dusk, close-ups of new fixtures, the dock at golden hour. The luxury SUV appeared in frame, often angled just right, keys catching light. Captions spoke of independence and timing and finally getting what you deserve. I scrolled once, then stopped. The images did their work without my participation. Greg Mallory entered the picture soon after. He was loud in a practiced way, laughter arriving before the punchline. At family gatherings, he shook hands with too much grip and introduced himself as if the room might forget. He made jokes that landed with a thud and looked to Brenda for confirmation. When his eyes found me, they skimmed. "Must be nice," he said once, nodding toward the photos on his phone, "when you've got ambition." I set my glass down carefully so it wouldn't clink. The family leaned in. Stories grew legs. My father spoke about the house with pride that borrowed certainty from repetition. He asked about dock repairs he'd seen online, about views he'd memorized from pictures. I listened and passed the salt. When someone asked how Brenda managed it, Greg answered for her, listing hustle and vision and timing. I noticed what he didn't list. I noticed how often the SUV keys were placed on the table, how they migrated closer to the center of conversation. Rent arrived on schedule, at first processed by the manager and deposited to the trust account without ceremony. I checked the ledger monthly, the numbers lining up the way they should. Inspections came back clean, shoes aligned by the door, counters wiped. The house held itself. I kept copies of everything the way I always had. There's comfort in a file that closes flat. Belief is efficient when it's fed consistently. The family accepted the image because it answered questions they preferred not to ask. Greg's barbs sharpened, then dulled into habit. Brenda's smile settled into something permanent. At dinner, I was asked if I'd seen the lake lately. I said no. It was accurate. I hadn't needed to. The illusion didn't crack that day. It didn't need to. It was doing exactly what illusions do, drawing attention away from the mechanism beneath them. I watched recorded dates, saved screenshots, and let the story travel on its own momentum. Ownership doesn't always make noise. Sometimes it waits patient as a signature drying on a page, while others pose beside what they don't understand. The first sign wasn't dramatic. It arrived as an absence. The rent ledger, usually tidy and punctual, showed a blank where a figure should have been. I noticed it on a Tuesday morning, the light clean and unforgiving across my desk. I refreshed the portal once, then, again listening to the soft click of the mouse. Nothing changed. I marked the date in pencil on a pad I keep for irregularities and closed the browser. One missed payment can be noise. Patterns take longer. The second month brought texture. The property manager's inspection photos shifted in tone. Shoes no longer lined the entry. They scattered. A new light fixture appeared over the island, unapproved wires visible where a plate should have been. The dock rail showed fresh screws, uneven the wrong metal for the environment. I zoomed in, counting. I rotated the screen to check timestamps. The report ended with a neutral sentence tenant reminded of lease terms. I initialed the page and filed it behind the first. By the third month, the house had a sound. Music late, bleeding into early morning. Laughter that carries across water because it expects to. The manager forwarded a note from a neighbor about cars parked overnight, unfamiliar plates. I pictured the driveway filling the way tables do when a party runs long. Greg's name appeared in the margins of emails now, not as a guest but as a presence. He had moved people in without notice. The manager wrote couches unfolding where bedrooms should have remained counted. I underlined the clause about occupancy limits and closed the document. Brenda's posts didn't slow. If anything, they brightened. The luxury SUV featured prominently doors open like wings. Captions leaned into permanence. Home. Finally settled. The comments applauded. I watched the footage without sound the way you do when you're checking for edits. I turned my glass once ice rotating until it found its rest. Silence has a tempo if you let it. The fourth month arrived with a partial payment enough to signal awareness, not enough to repair breach. The ledger recalculated. Late fees accrued clean and automatic. I printed the statement and set it beside the other's edges aligned. The manager asked how I wanted to proceed. I typed a short reply and deleted it. Then I typed another. Continue standard notices. I hit send and felt my shoulders settle. Process is a language everyone understands. I kept everything. Screenshots of posts with dates, copies of inspection reports, emails flagged and saved. The trust account reconciled without comment, absorbing the absence the way it absorbs presence without opinion. At family gatherings, the story continued uninterrupted. Brenda spoke about improvements as if they were inevitable. Greg joked about making the place their own. My father listened with a smile that assumed ownership where there was only access. I passed the potatoes and said nothing. There were nights I considered the speed of resolution, how quickly a letter could be drafted, how efficiently a notice could be served. I measured the impulse and set it down. Timing isn't hesitation, it's respect for consequence. I wanted the record complete. I wanted the silence to do its work. By the time the debt crossed a threshold that changes tone from oversight to liability, I had a file thick enough to stand on its own. Tabs labeled, dates verified, signatures matched. The house, meanwhile, kept wearing its shine even as the structure underneath began to complain. Floors creak louder when they're ignored. So do people. I did nothing. Not because I couldn't act, but because I could afford not to yet. Silence stretched deliberate and unmistakable until it stopped sounding like patience and started reading like intent. The silence had done its work by the time Christmas came around again. It had gathered weight like snow pressed into ice. I arrived early as I usually did, the house already warm, the smell of citrus cleaner and pine thick in the air. The table was set with the same plates, the same silverware polished to a soft shine. I placed my coat over the chair at the corner and set my bag beneath it, careful to keep it upright. Outside the driveway, lights hummed on steady and bright. Dinner unfolded along its familiar track. The ham was sliced, wine was poured. Someone adjusted the volume on the radio when a carol came on too loud. My father told the same story he told last year, pausing at the same places for laughter. When the talk turned to the lake, the room leaned in without realizing it. Brenda spoke easily. Greg filled the gaps. The words sounded practiced, the confidence borrowed from repetition. I cut my food into even pieces and listened to the forks move. Then my father cleared his throat. The sound traveled the length of the table. He smiled in my direction the way he does when he believes he's being generous. Funny how some people still rent, he said, light enough to pass for humor. And others figure things out. He gestured vaguely as if success were a direction anyone could point to. The words landed where they had before. I let them sit. I reached into my bag and took out the iPad. The motion was small. No one noticed until I placed it at the center of the table between the serving dishes where the light could reach it. The screen woke with a soft chime. I didn't look up. I tapped once, then again, pulling the file I had prepared the night before. The lease appeared, first header, dates, signatures. I swiped. The ledger followed, columns aligned, 6 months highlighted. I swiped again. The trust documents filled the screen tabs, visible at the edges, my authority marked and initialed. The room shifted. Chairs stilled. Someone set down a glass too quickly and steadied it with both hands. I felt my breath slow and matched it. "That house is mine," I said, keeping my voice level. I turned the iPad slightly so the numbers faced Brenda. "And you haven't paid rent in 6 months." The sentence did not ask for permission to exist. It sat there. Brenda's smile faltered, then reset thinner this time. Greg leaned forward, squinting as if proximity could change meaning. My father opened his mouth and closed it again, the motion quiet but complete. I watched the reflection of the chandelier tremble on the screen. The documents did not move. They didn't need to. No one argued. There was nothing to argue with. The lease spoke for itself. The balance was precise. The signatures matched. I waited the way you do at a crosswalk, eyes forward, trusting the signal because it had been earned. Outside, a car passed, tires hissing on snowmelt. Inside, the clock continued unbothered. I slid the iPad back toward myself and dimmed the screen. The room exhaled in pieces. Someone asked a question that went unanswered. I stood, pushed my chair in, and lifted my coat from the back. As I reached the door, I paused not for effect, but because I needed my keys. I picked them up from the sideboard and felt their weight. When I stepped into the cold, the night met me where it always had. Behind me, the house held its breath. In front of me, the truth did not need to follow. It was already there. The cold followed me home that night, then loosened its grip. By morning, process had replaced emotion the way it always does. Notices were generated on letterhead that didn't blink. Dates populated themselves. A certified envelope left the post office with a tracking number that could be checked, then checked again. The manager confirmed receipt and timelines in a tone that didn't invite commentary. I initialed the margins, scanned the pages, and filed them under the tab I'd prepared months earlier. The house responded the way structures do when rules reassert themselves. Inspections documented damage without adjectives. Unauthorized changes were itemized and priced. The ledger recalculated with the steadiness of a metronome. When the lock change was scheduled, I approved the invoice and moved on. Brenda called once. I let it ring. Greg didn't. Silence clarified things faster than conversation ever had. Word travels in towns like ours. It moved from the lake to the church parking lot, then to the foyer, then to the pews. The story shed its polish as it went. My father's posture changed before his schedule did. Invitations stopped arriving. His name moved from the program to the margin. I watched from a distance, noticing the small adjustments, how he chose seats, how he avoided eye contact, how the usher paused a beat longer than courtesy required. Consequence has a way of rearranging rooms. I didn't attend the eviction. I didn't need to. The report arrived with photographs and timestamps, signatures captured where the tablet asked for them. Keys returned in a plain envelope. The house went quiet again, the kind of quiet that isn't absence but order restored. I authorized repairs and a relisting. Offers came quickly, numbers clean and unapologetic. I accepted one that met the file, not my feelings. At home, my routines held. Coffee measured, papers aligned. I changed my phone number and updated the forwarding address to a box no one knew. When messages slipped through, I read them once and archived them without reply. Separation doesn't have to be dramatic to be complete. It only has to be consistent. There was no victory dinner, no speech, no explanation. I stopped attending gatherings that required translation. I let the distance do its work. On evenings, when the light angled just right, I sat by the window and listened to the ordinary sounds of my block dog's doors, the soft thud of packages placed carefully and left. The body remembers what safety feels like when it arrives quietly. Months later, the file closed. The final statement balanced. The trust account reflected the outcome exactly as the documents predicted it would. I saved the confirmation and shut the laptop. Outside, winter eased into something gentler. Inside, nothing asked to be justified. If this had happened to you on Christmas night, if the truth had been waiting all that time, would you have stayed silent or told it when the record was complete? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if you believe quiet justice can be stronger than anger, subscribe. Some stories don't raise their voices. They last.